Aloha mai kako. My name is Rachel Sprague and I'm the co-director of conservation for LāNATS. Today I'm going to talk a bit about our UA'U or Hawaiian Petrel conservation work on Lāna'i. So Lāna'i has endured years of habitat degradation that has reduced the native music forest to about 3% of what it once was. You can see across the island's mountain ridge, ihale, the patches of bright green representing the remaining uluhe fern-dominated habitat. Sadly, the loss of forest, combined with the island's low elevation, topping out around 3,300 feet, has meant that much of the diversity of native birds has also disappeared. So even with Lāna'i's small size, Lāna'i did have endemic birds in addition to more common species like apapane and i'iwi. Just a few examples are the Lāna'i kialoa, the olama'o, and alohio. The UA'U, or Hawaiian petrel, wasn't endemic, but was found in great numbers throughout Hawaii's montane forests and alpine landscapes. At the same time as these other species were being seen for the last time, the UA'U on Lāna'i were also thought to have joined their forest bird cousins in extinction or extirpation. The naturalist George Monroe wrote about finding just a few wings of dead UA'U in the 1920s with just a few remnant breeding birds. And by the mid-1900s, UA'U were assumed to be gone until Lawrence Hirai also observed seeing at least a few again in the 1970s. But luckily, the UA'U on Lāna'i did not follow their songbird relatives and kept going through a few more assumed extirpations, largely the results of no one looking for them, until Fern Duval and Jay Penniman confirmed UA'U on Lāna'i in significant numbers in 2006. Eventually, Palama Lāna'i purchased the majority of the island in 2012 from Castle and Cook and started up a dedicated wildlife program a few years later with UA'U as one of the priorities. So today, they are sadly the last remaining native bird breeding in the forest on Lāna'i ihale that we can still get a photo of. Like most other endangered species, conservation of UA'U on Lāna'i required figuring out their distribution so we know where to focus management efforts, then determine primary threats, what protection actions are needed, and implement good enough monitoring to evaluate management actions and determine emerging threats into the future. I'm going to briefly talk about the work we've done in each of these areas to find and protect UA'U on Lāna'i and some of the additional projects that are currently in the works. So first, to protect a species, you have to find it. UA'U burrows are notoriously difficult to find given their propensity for steep slopes and burrowing under extremely dense vegetation. Over the last 5 years, known burrows on the island have gone from about 65 when I started in 2016 to nearly 550 known burrows now, shown here on the map in the purple diamonds. If you look at the known burrows, they do appear to be pretty well dispersed through most of the remaining music forest, again, that light fluorescent green vegetation. But many of those blank areas are not indicative of the absence of birds, but rather challenges to accessibility. So this map of known burrow density is highly influenced by factors like search effort, safety of access, slope, and vegetation cover. So concurrently to burrow searching over the last few years, we worked with the Kauai Endangered Seabird Recovery Project and Conservation Metrics to use song meters to map call rates. This has been shown on Kauai to be a good proxy for breeding activity. This method has given us a really interesting additional view of relative activity. Each spot and label on this map is a location where a song meter was deployed for at least a month in the last 4 years. So what this shows us is a picture of the colony with call rates of 30 to over 40 calls per minute in the dark orange and red areas, and the blue areas around the edges as lowest activity with up to about 5 calls per minute. Generally, these are areas of lower habitat quality that are being invaded by strawberry guava and other invasive species. So in short, the takeaway from this is that there are a lot of UA'U on Lāna'i. Now, as we were doing that distribution mapping, we were also working with the Kauai Endangered Seabird Recovery Project to develop a monitoring program for UA'U burrows. But unfortunately, as with most other places in Hawaii, as soon as we started monitoring with cameras, we found very few of these cute fuzzy chicks and many more photos like this of cats and rats depredating eggs and chicks and finding piles of dead adults killed by cats. We luckily do not have pigs or mongoose on Lāna'i to add to the threats, but even without them, about 75% of the nests failed in 2016. That was the first year that we started monitoring with these methods. So in response to that pretty terrible year, we have spent the last few years setting up a landscape level predator control program. By the numbers, we now have about 110 cat traps over about 10 miles of trails. And then we also have 775 self-resetting automatic rat traps over about 450 acres. So what this looks like on a map relative to the UA'U is this. The purple diamonds are again known UA'U burrows. And as I mentioned, the number of burrows found almost doubled year over year for the last few years. So this landscape level approach became really important rather than just protecting known burrows. Because as you saw from the call rate distribution map, there are UA'U that need protecting over a much larger area than just the known burrows. So here, the yellow are A24 rat traps running with auto lure pumps that allow for checks and rebates just every 5 to 6 months. This has been quite the project to work on with the terrain and trying to figure out how to get good enough spacing to keep the rat numbers down while dealing with cliffs and a landscape that doesn't allow for a traditional grid design. But then zooming out a little, these green circles are cat traps. As a mesocarnivore, cats have a larger territory size than rats, so the trapping grid is spaced to cover more area. And we're now using remote cameras to monitor the traps, which gives us the efficiency to maintain a grid of this size. And now what all of this has meant for UA'U has ended up being really quite significant. I mentioned all of those depredations in 2016. That year we had about 25% apparent reproductive success. However, with landscape level predator control, we've seen a dramatic increase to nearly 79% apparent reproductive success across the colony last year. The numbers over the points on the graph here are just the number of monitored burrows each year where we were able to confirm breeding as well as confirm the outcome as fledged or failed. So if you just flip around the previous graph of apparent success to break down the proportion of failures each year since 2016 that could be attributed to cats and rats, you can see a dramatic decrease in cat depredations to the point that there were no cat depredations on monitored burrows in 2018 and 2019, and much lower rat depredation compared to 2016. I do want to note that the overall percent nest failure did continue to decrease from 2017 through 2019. So some of what looks like an increase in rat depredations a little bit in 2018 and 19 is more likely just better monitoring. We had more burrow cameras and were able to assign cause of failure on more burrows. So we're seeing reproductive success dramatically increase from 2016 to 2019. And I mentioned those song meters earlier that we use to map UA'U activity. We also have some of those units at what we call static locations, where we put them in the same location each year to measure change over time, working again with the Kauai Seabird Project and conservation metrics. So now that we've been doing it for a few years, we're starting to have enough locations to start to see change. The yellow dots on the map are those locations where we've had good quality recordings each year from 2016 to 2019. And what we're seeing is a dramatic increase over time in the recorded calls per minute across the colony. On average, this is showing a 30% year-over-year increase in activity. So what is up next? To share just a few of the projects, we're always trying to understand more about UA'U on Lanai. So we've been working with Andre Rain from Kauai on tracking UA'U flyways over the island to look more closely at how they're accessing the colony, both to add to the understanding of the species and its movements across the ocean, but also to help proactively avoid conflicts with human infrastructure and development over the island itself. Monitoring is obviously always important and informative, but as you can tell from the number of burrows there are on the island, monitoring all of the known burrows on Lanai starts to become unsustainable. So we've been working with the Recovery Ecology Group with the San Diego Zoo's Institute for Conservation Research. They did a power analysis and a deep dive into our data to explore and design a sampling-based approach to monitoring that's specific to Lanai and still provides the desired resolution for answering questions about response to management actions. We also want to turn our focus to habitat management and protection. So we've been working with Dr. Lucas Fortini at USGS, and he's been looking at the history and pattern of invasion of Lanai ihale by invasive plants and developing a prioritization for approaching habitat protection so that we can take that and work on an implementation plan from there for protection and enhancement of native habitat across Lanai ihale. And then lastly, for this talk, we know that predators don't just go away and that trapping is always just a reduction, not an elimination of depredation. So to create a core of protected habitat, we're now underway with construction of an 80-acre predator-proof fence with NIFWF and Pono Pacific. The fence is using a similar construction to Nihoku on Kauai, pictured there on the right, and James Campbell on Oahu. The fence you can see there on the left is going to be a subsection in blue of a larger ungulate protection watershed fence on Lāna ihale, pictured in yellow. So we're going to be replacing part of that ungulate fence with predator-proof construction and then building essentially a subunit to the inside that will exclude cats and rats from the core of the UA'U colony. Once completed, this fence is going to be the largest montane predator-proof fence outside of New Zealand, at least until Kauai gets going on some of their planned projects. So here are some recent photos of the fence starting to go in down the West Hi'i Ridge. The fence broke ground in February, so as you might expect, the construction has been influenced by COVID, but it is moving along and we are extremely excited to see this vision turning into a reality. So zooming out again, the predator-proof area is obviously just going to be a small portion of Lāna ihale, a small portion of the UA'U colony, but we hope that it will become a core refuge for the forest and a focal conservation area, not just for UA'U, but also for the other forest species that are damaged, especially by rats and ungulates. So with this protected area, we hope to see more of these and other native species in the future on Lāna ihale. So I just want to give many thanks to our fantastic staff who have made all of this great work happen, our partners in the field in project design, data management and analysis, funding supporters, and partners who provided their valuable expertise and guidance. We deeply appreciate everything all of you have shared to support conservation on Lanai and a future for all of its native species. Mahalo.